The heat didn't just fall on West Texas. It pressed down like a boot on a neck, relentless and mean. By mid-July, the earth had cracked open in places, revealing nothing underneath but more dust, more disappointment. The sky stayed white from horizon to horizon, bleached of mercy, and the wind carried grit that got into everything. Your eyes, your lungs, the machinery that was supposed to keep you alive out here. Eliza Crow stood in the barn doorway, watching her cattle mill around the dry water trough, like mourners at a funeral. 18 head left. There'd been 42 when Thomas was alive. Some had died. Some she'd sold for nothing to keep the bank from taking the whole spread. The rest looked like they were deciding whether it was worth the effort to keep breathing. She was 31 years old, felt 60. "Mama?" Her son's voice cut through the haze of her thoughts. Daniel stood behind her, skinny arms wrapped around himself despite the heat. 7 years old and already learning that the world didn't care about fair. His eyes, Thomas's eyes, that particular shade of brown that looked gold in certain light, tracked her face for signs of what came next. "Well's dry again," she said. "No point sugarcoating it." "The deep one?" "That's the one." Daniel's face did something complicated, fear and resignation fighting for territory. "What are we going to do?" Eliza looked back at the cattle. What were they going to do? That was the question that woke her up at 3 a.m. every morning, the one that followed her through every chore, every failed plan, every small surrender to the way things were going. "Gonna figure it out," she said, like always. It was a lie, and they both knew it. The ranch house sat on 200 acres of land that had once been prime grazing territory. Thomas had inherited it from his father, who'd built the place with his own hands back when the frontier still felt like possibility instead of punishment. The house itself was solid, good bones, thick walls that kept out the worst of the heat. But solid didn't matter when the well ran dry and the bank wanted money you didn't have. Inside, the kitchen table was covered in papers Eliza had been avoiding: loan documents, tax notices, letters from the Cattlemen's Association, suggesting, politely at first, less politely now, that perhaps she should consider selling to someone more capable of managing such a property. Someone male, they didn't say, but meant. She'd been managing it fine until the drought hit, until Thomas got himself killed over a water dispute with the Hargrove outfit up north, until everything that could go wrong decided to go wrong at once, like the universe had a quota to fill. Eliza poured herself coffee that had been sitting on the stove since dawn. It tasted like it had been filtered through boot leather, but it was hot, and it was there. She sat down at the table and made herself look at the numbers again. The banknote was due in 6 weeks. $300. She had $47 in a coffee can buried in the yard, and maybe another 30 in coins scattered around the house. The cattle weren't worth driving to market in their current state. She'd lose money on the transport alone. The few crops she'd tried to grow had shriveled before they'd gotten knee-high. $300 might as well have been $3,000. A knock at the door made her jump. Her hand went automatically to the rifle leaning against the wall before she caught herself. Couldn't draw on every person who came to the door, even if half of them probably deserved it. She opened the door to find Samuel Price standing on her porch, hat in hand, expression somewhere between apologetic and uncomfortable. Sam ran the general store in town, had known Thomas since they were boys. He was a decent man, which made what he'd come to say worse somehow. "Eliza." "Sam? Can I come in?" She stepped aside. Sam walked in like a man approaching a sickbed, careful and quiet. He set his hat on the table, noticed the papers spread there, and his discomfort deepened. "I'll get to it straight," he said. "Bank sent me. They want me to inventory the property." "Inventory? In case of—" He gestured at the papers. "You know, foreclosure." They didn't use that word, but that's what they meant. Sam nodded. He looked miserable. "I told them you'd pull through. Told them you're as tough as Thomas ever was. But they got their procedures." Eliza felt something cold settle in her chest. "When?" "End of the week." "I'm sorry, Eliza. I tried to buy you more time." "I know you did." After Sam left, she sat back down at the table and stared at the papers until the numbers stopped meaning anything. Daniel had disappeared into his room. The boy had a sense for when things were bad and his mother needed space. Good kid. Too good for the hand he'd been dealt. The afternoon burned away into evening. Eliza fed the cattle what little hay she had left, checked the well again as if hope alone might make water appear, and fixed a dinner of beans and cornbread that neither she nor Daniel had much appetite for. It was nearly dark when she heard the horse. One rider, coming slow up the road from town. She grabbed the rifle. This time she didn't catch herself, and positioned herself where she could see through the window without being seen. The man who rode into her yard didn't look like trouble, but then trouble rarely announced itself with a brass band. He was tall, lean in the way of men who'd missed meals, wearing clothes that had seen better days, dark hair under a battered hat, a beard that needed trimming. He sat his horse like someone who'd been in the saddle too long and knew he'd be back in it soon. He stopped about 20 yards from the house and waited. Didn't dismount, didn't call out, just waited with the patience of someone who understood that a woman alone didn't take kindly to surprise visitors after sundown. Eliza stepped onto the porch, rifle visible, but not pointed at him. "Help you?" she called. "Yes, ma'am. Name's Caleb Vance. I'm not looking for trouble, just passing through. Saw your place from the road. Was hoping I might trade some work for a meal and maybe water for my horse." His voice was rough but even. Not the smooth talk of a con man, not the edge of someone looking for weakness. Just tired. "Work doing what?" "Whatever needs doing. I'm fair with tools, better with stock, and I don't steal or cause problems." That's what a man who steals and causes problems would say. Caleb's mouth twitched. Might have been the ghost of a smile. "I suppose it is. But it's also what an honest man would say, so you're stuck making a judgment call." Eliza studied him. The horse looked as worn as he did. A decent animal, but underfed. The saddle was old but well-maintained. He had a revolver on his hip, but his hand was nowhere near it. Everything about him suggested a man who'd been riding hard and sleeping rough, but not running from the law. Just running. "You can water your horse at the trough," she said finally. "Meal's already done, but I can heat up what's left. Work starts at dawn if you're still here." "I'll be here. Barn's that way. You sleep in the loft. Don't come to the house unless I call you." "Yes, ma'am." He rode toward the barn without another word. Eliza watched him go, rifle still in hand, wondering if she'd just made a smart decision or a fatal one. Hard to tell these days. Everything felt like a gamble when you were already losing. Inside, Daniel was peering through the window. "Who's that?" "Nobody. Maybe somebody. We'll see." "Is he staying?" "Just for tonight." "You don't know that." "Smart kid. Too smart." Eliza locked the door and wedged a chair under the knob for good measure. She checked the rifle, made sure it was loaded, and set it by her bed where she could reach it in the dark. Then she lay down in her clothes and didn't sleep, listening to the night sounds and waiting for trouble that might or might not come. Dawn arrived the way it always did, sudden and unforgiving. Eliza had maybe dozed for an hour total. She got up, made coffee, and was halfway through her first cup when she looked out the window and saw Caleb already working. He'd found the broken fence at the east pasture, the one she'd been meaning to fix for 2 weeks, and was replacing posts. Not just patching it, but doing it right, sinking the posts deep and making sure they'd hold. His horse was grazing nearby, and he'd stripped down to his shirt despite the morning chill, working with the efficient movements of someone who knew his craft. She watched him for a few minutes, looking for signs of laziness or corners being cut. Found nothing, just steady, competent work. Daniel appeared at her elbow, still in his nightshirt. "He's fixing the fence." "I see that." "You gonna feed him?" "Made a deal, didn't I?" She put together a plate of eggs, bacon, and biscuits, more than she'd planned, but the man was working hard and you didn't skimp on someone doing honest labor. She walked it out to the pasture, Daniel trailing behind her like a curious shadow. Caleb saw them coming and stopped work, wiping his hands on his pants. Up close in daylight, Eliza could see the details she'd missed the night before. The scar along his jawline, the way his eyes stayed watchful even when he was being friendly, the calluses on his hands that spoke of years of hard work. "Brought you breakfast," she said, handing him the plate. "Appreciate it, ma'am." "Eliza, ma'am makes me feel old." "Eliza, then." He nodded at Daniel. "This your boy?" "This is Daniel. Say hello, Daniel." "Hello," Daniel said quietly. "Morning, Daniel." "That's a good strong name." Daniel didn't answer, just pressed closer to his mother's side. Couldn't blame him for being cautious. Caleb ate, standing up, quick and efficient, like a man used to eating on the move. When he finished, he handed back the plate. That was real good. Thank you. Fence looks solid. Should hold. You've got some other sections that could use attention if you want me to keep going. How long were you planning to stay? Long as you need the help and don't mind having me around. Eliza considered that. She needed help. That was beyond question. The ranch was falling apart faster than she could patch it, and there were jobs she simply couldn't do alone. But having a strange man around, especially with the way people talked in town. People are going to talk, she said. People always talk. I've got enough trouble without adding to it. Caleb met her eyes. I understand, but I'll work for meals and a place to sleep, and I'll move on whenever you say. Until then, I'll keep my head down and my mouth shut. That's all I can offer. It wasn't much of a promise, but it was something, and something was more than she had yesterday. All right, but we're clear. This is temporary. Soon as I can get back on my feet, you move along. Yes, ma'am. Eliza. She left him to his work and went back to the house, trying to ignore the small voice in her head that said she'd just complicated her life in ways she couldn't predict. Over the next few days, Caleb proved his worth. He fixed fences, repaired the barn roof where it had started to leak, cleaned out the irrigation ditches that hadn't seen water in months, but might again someday. He worked from sunup to sundown, spoke only when spoken to, and kept his distance from the house like she'd asked. Daniel, predictably, was fascinated. The boy had been starved for male company since Thomas died, and he'd taken to following Caleb around whenever Eliza wasn't looking, asking questions and generally making a nuisance of himself. Caleb tolerated it with more patience than she'd expected, answering Daniel's endless questions without talking down to him. Where'd you come from? She heard Daniel ask one afternoon. Lots of places, Caleb said. Where are you going? Don't know yet. Why not? Haven't decided. Mama says we can't leave because this is our land and we have to fight for it. Caleb glanced toward the house where Eliza was definitely not eavesdropping from the kitchen window. Your mama's a smart woman. Land's worth fighting for. Were you in the war? A pause. Yeah. Did you kill people? Daniel. Eliza's voice came sharp from the doorway. That's enough questions. Come help me with the washing. Daniel trudged over, properly chastised. Caleb went back to his work without looking up, but there was a tightness in his shoulders that hadn't been there before. That night, after Daniel was asleep, Eliza sat on the porch and watched the stars come out. The air had finally cooled enough to breathe, and for a moment she could almost forget everything that was wrong. Caleb emerged from the barn, noticed her there, and hesitated. It's all right, she said. You can sit if you want. He sat on the steps, leaving a respectful distance between them. For a while they didn't talk, just listened to the night sounds, crickets, the cattle moving in the dark, wind in the dry grass. I'm sorry about your husband, Caleb said finally. Daniel mentioned Thomas. His name was Thomas. She didn't know why it mattered that Caleb knew his name, but it did. He was a good man, stubborn, but good. What happened? Water dispute with the Hargrove Ranch. They claimed our well was pulling from their aquifer. Thomas went to talk it out and... She shrugged. They said it was self-defense. No witnesses to say different. The law do anything? Sheriff's in Hargrove's pocket. Whole town is, near enough. Caleb didn't respond to that, but his jaw tightened. That's why I'm careful about you being here, Eliza continued. Already got a target on my back. People think a woman can't run a ranch, think I should sell out and move to town, be respectable. Having a strange man working for me. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. Might as well paint whore on the side of the barn. I can go? No. The word came out harder than she meant it. No, I need the help. And I'm tired of letting other people's opinions run my life. Let them talk. All right. They sat in silence a while longer. Then Eliza asked the question that had been nagging at her. Why are you really here, Caleb? Man with your skills could find paying work anywhere. Maybe I'm tired of moving. And maybe I'm the Queen of England. He smiled at that. A real one this time, brief as lightning. Fair enough. Truth is, I've been running for a while. Not from the law, he added quickly. Just from things I'd rather not think about. Figured maybe if I stopped running, worked honest for a while, things might settle in my head. This seemed like a good place to stop? Ranch that's falling apart? Woman who can barely keep her head above water? Trouble coming from every direction? Seems like a place that could use someone who's good at handling trouble. Eliza looked at him, really looked, saw the old wounds in his eyes, the weight he carried that had nothing to do with physical burdens, recognized it because she carried her own version. We're both a mess, she said. Yes, ma'am. Eliza. Eliza. She stood up, brushed dust off her skirt. Well then, guess we'll figure it out together, at least for a while. Get some sleep, Caleb. Tomorrow we're riding into town for supplies and you're coming with me. That gonna cause more talk? Definitely, but I need someone to watch my back and you're what I've got. The next morning they hitched up the wagon and headed for town. Daniel came along, sitting between them on the bench, chattering away to Caleb about every rock and bird they passed. Eliza let him talk, grateful for the distraction from her own thoughts. The town of Redemption, ironically named if ever there was one, sat 15 miles south of the ranch. It wasn't much. A main street with a general store, a saloon, a bank, a church, and a scattering of houses. The kind of place where everyone knew your business before you knew it yourself. They got the looks the moment they rolled in. Women in their Sunday dresses, despite it being Thursday, pausing their conversations to stare. Men outside the saloon, tracking the wagon with eyes that held everything from curiosity to contempt. By the time Eliza pulled up in front of the general store, she could feel the weight of their judgment like a physical thing. Stay with the wagon, she told Caleb. You sure? I'm sure. She climbed down with Daniel, acutely aware of every eye on her. Inside the store, Sam Price looked up from the counter and his expression went carefully neutral. Eliza. Sam, need some supplies. She handed him her list. Sam looked it over, did some calculating. This'll run you about $23. She had 22 in her pocket. I can give you 20 now, the rest when I sell some stock. Eliza. Sam's voice dropped low. Bank's already breathing down my neck about your credit. I can't or won't. Can't, I'm sorry. She was about to argue when the door opened behind her. She turned to find Robert Hargrove standing there, looking like he owned the place, which, given his family's money, he might. Hargrove was in his 50s, solid and weathered, with cold blue eyes and a smile that never reached them. He'd been at Thomas's funeral, had offered to buy the ranch to spare you the burden of trying to manage it alone. She'd told him what he could do with his offer. Mrs. Crow, he said now, tipping his hat with exaggerated courtesy. Heard you were having some financial difficulties. Nothing that concerns you. Well now, that's where you're wrong. He picked up her supply list from the counter, looked it over. See, when a neighbor's struggling, it concerns all of us. Community responsibility and such. I'm managing fine. Are you? Because from where I stand, you're about 6 weeks from losing everything. Banknote coming due, property falling into disrepair. His eyes flicked toward the window where Caleb was visible with the wagon. Taking in drifters. He's a hired hand. That what you're calling it? Hargrove's smile widened. Town's calling it something different. Heat flooded Eliza's face. You got something to say? Say it plain. Just that it's unseemly. A widow woman living alone with a strange man. Makes folks wonder about your judgment. Makes them think maybe you're not fit to hold property. The law says different. Law says a lot of things, but law also says debts need to be paid. And when you can't pay yours, he set the supply list down. I'm prepared to make you a fair offer. $3,000 for the whole property. That'll clear your debts and leave you enough to start fresh somewhere else. $3,000 for 200 acres and a house? That's robbery. That's the market for distressed property. Take it or leave it. I'll leave it. Hargrove shrugged. Your choice. But that offer has an expiration date. Come foreclosure, the bank will sell to whoever bids, and I promise you I'll be the only bidder. Then you'll get nothing. He tipped his hat again. Think about it, Mrs. Crow. Think about what's best for that boy of yours. He left. The store felt smaller somehow, the air thicker. Sam wouldn't meet her eyes. I'll spot you the supplies, he said quietly. Pay me when you can. Sam, just take them, Eliza, please. She wanted to argue, but pride wouldn't feed her son or save the ranch. She nodded, helped Sam load the supplies into a crate, and carried them out to the wagon. Caleb took one look at her face and didn't ask questions. Just loaded the crate, helped Daniel up, and waited for her to climb aboard before getting the wagon moving. They were halfway home when Daniel broke the silence. "I don't like Mr. Hargrove." "That makes two of us," Eliza said. "Three," Caleb added quietly. "He wants our ranch." "I know." "Are we going to give it to him?" Eliza looked down at her son's upturned face, saw Thomas in the shape of his jaw, in the stubborn set of his mouth, saw herself in the fear he was trying to hide. "No," she said. "We're not." "How are we going to stop him?" That was the question, wasn't it? How did you fight men with money, power, and no conscience when all you had was determination and a ranch that was falling apart? "I don't know yet," she admitted, "but we'll figure something out." Beside her, Caleb shifted slightly. Didn't speak, but his presence felt steadier somehow. Like maybe she wasn't entirely alone in this fight. When they got back to the ranch, Caleb unloaded the supplies while Eliza got Daniel settled with his schoolwork. She stood at the kitchen window, watching Caleb work, thinking about Hargrove's threat and the banknote and all the ways this could go wrong. The well was still dry. The cattle were still dying. The money still wasn't there. But Caleb was fixing the barn door that had been hanging crooked for months, and Daniel was laughing at something, and the sun was setting in shades of orange and red that made even this harsh land look beautiful for a moment. It wasn't much, but it was something. And sometimes Eliza was learning something was enough to keep you fighting for one more day. That night, Eliza couldn't sleep. She lay in bed listening to the house settle, to Daniel's soft breathing in the next room, to the wind testing the corners of the windows. Her mind kept circling back to Hargrove's face, that smug certainty that he'd already won. Around 2 a.m, she gave up pretending and went to the kitchen. Made coffee in the dark because lighting a lamp felt like admitting defeat to the insomnia. She was halfway through her first cup when she heard footsteps on the porch. Her hand went to the rifle before she recognized the measured pace. "Caleb!" She opened the door before he could knock. He stood there looking surprised, shirt half buttoned, hair sticking up on one side. "Heard movement," he said. "Wanted to make sure everything was all right. Can't sleep." "Yeah, me neither." She stepped aside. "Might as well come in then." He followed her to the kitchen, accepted the coffee she poured without asking. They sat across from each other at the table, the space between them filled with the kind of quiet that didn't need filling. "Want to talk about it?" Caleb asked finally. "About what?" "Whatever happened in town that's got you wound tight as a spring." Eliza wrapped her hands around her cup. The heat felt good against her palms. "Man named Hargrove. He's the one who killed Thomas, though nobody can prove it. Now he wants the ranch. Made me an offer today, $3,000 for the whole property." Caleb whistled low. "That's insulting." "That's the point. He's not trying to buy me out fair. He's trying to steal it legal." She took a sip of coffee, grimaced at the bitterness. "In 6 weeks, when I can't pay the bank, he'll buy it at auction for even less. Then I'll have nothing." "What about the cattle? You could sell them, make the payment." "Look at them, Caleb. They're half dead already." "Nobody's going to pay decent money for walking skeletons. And even if I could sell them, it wouldn't be enough. I'd need at least double what they're worth." "So you need water." "I need a miracle. Water's just where it starts." Caleb leaned back in his chair, thinking. "There's water north of here. Mountain runoff that feeds into the valley. Saw it when I was riding through a few weeks back. That's Hargrove territory. Some of it, but there's open range up there too. Free grazing, public water." Eliza shook her head. "It's a 3-day drive minimum, through rough country. I'd lose more cattle on the trail than I'd save getting them to water." "Maybe. Or maybe you'd save enough to make it worth the risk." He met her eyes. "What else you got to try?" She wanted to argue with him, to list all the reasons it wouldn't work. But the truth was, he was right. She had nothing else. Just a dying ranch and a ticking clock, and a son who deserved better than watching his mother surrender. "It's dangerous," she said. "Everything is right now. Hargrove's men patrol that range. They catch us up there. Then we don't get caught." The way he said it, casual, like they were discussing the weather, made something shift in her chest. He'd said we. Not you. We. "You don't owe me this," Eliza said quietly. I know. Could get yourself killed for somebody else's fight. Wouldn't be the first time. He drained his coffee, set the cup down. I meant what I said about stopping running. This seems like a good place to make a stand. You're either very brave or very stupid. Little of both, probably. Despite everything, Eliza felt herself smile. When would we leave? Soon as possible. Every day we wait, those cattle get weaker. I'd say tomorrow, but you need time to prepare. Day after? Day after, she agreed and felt the weight of the decision settle over her like a coat. Heavy, but necessary. They spent the next day getting ready. Eliza went through her supplies, took inventory of what they'd need for the trail. Food, water, medical supplies for the cattle, rope, tools. Caleb checked over the wagon, reinforced the weak points, made sure it would hold up over rough terrain. Daniel sensed something was happening and attached himself to Eliza's side, asking questions she didn't want to answer. Where are we going? North. Why? To find water for the cattle. Can I come? No. His face crumpled. Why not? Because it's dangerous and you're staying with Mrs. Chen in town. I don't want to stay with Mrs. Chen. I want to stay with you. Eliza knelt down to his level, put her hands on his shoulders. Listen to me. I need you to be brave right now, all right? I need you to trust me. We're going to fix this, but I can't do it if I'm worried about you getting hurt. What if you get hurt? The fear in his voice nearly broke her. She pulled him close, held him tight. I won't. I promise. It was a promise she had no business making, but sometimes you lied to the people you love to keep them from falling apart. She'd learned that from Thomas. They left before dawn 2 days later. The cattle were confused and restless, not understanding why they were being driven from the only home they knew. Eliza rode point on her mare, Caleb brought up the rear on his gelding, and between them 18 head of cattle moved north toward water and hope and whatever else waited in the hard country ahead. The first day was slow going. The cattle were weak, stopping frequently to rest, and every delay made Eliza's nerves wind tighter. They were exposed out here, visible for miles. If Hargrove's men were watching, and she had to assume they were, it wouldn't take long for word to get back. They made camp that night in a shallow draw that offered some protection from the wind. Caleb got a fire going while Eliza checked on the cattle. 2 of them were limping badly. One looked like it might not make it through the night. She sat down hard on a rock, suddenly exhausted in a way that went beyond physical tiredness. This was a mistake. She'd risked everything on a desperate gamble, and it was going to fail, and then she'd have nothing left. Hey, Caleb's voice cut through her spiral. He handed her a plate of beans and hardtack. Eat something. I'm not hungry. Don't care. Eat anyway. She took the plate because arguing took energy she didn't have. The food was bland but hot, and after a few bites she realized she was starving. They ate in silence, watching the fire burn down. One of them's not going to make it, Eliza said finally. I know. Should probably put it down now, kinder that way. Your call. But she didn't move, couldn't quite bring herself to give the order. That cow represented money, hope, a chance at survival. Even dying, it was still worth something in her ledger of desperation. Caleb stood up, brushed dust off his pants. I'll do it. No, it's my responsibility. Eliza, I said no. She got up and walked over to where the cow had separated itself from the herd. It stood with its head down, breathing labored. She could count every rib. When she approached, it didn't even look up. She pulled her revolver, checked that it was loaded. Her hands were steady. That surprised her. Everything else in her life was shaking apart, but her hands were steady. One shot, clean and quick. The cow dropped without a sound. Eliza stood there for a moment, gun still raised, feeling nothing and everything at once. Then she holstered the weapon and walked back to the fire. One less mouth to feed, she said, and her voice sounded flat even to her own ears. Caleb didn't respond, just moved over to make room for her by the fire. They sat together as darkness settled fully over the land, neither speaking, both lost in their own thoughts. The second day was worse. They pushed harder, trying to make up time, and the cattle struggled to keep pace. By midday they'd lost another one, and a third was barely staying on its feet. The sun beat down mercilessly, and water was already running low. Around 3 in the afternoon, Caleb pulled his horse up short. What? Eliza called. Riders, east of us, maybe 2 miles out. She looked where he was pointing and saw the dust cloud. 4 horses, maybe 5, moving parallel to their position. Could be travelers, she said, knowing it wasn't true. Could be, but I don't like the way they're shadowing us. They kept moving, but the tension ratcheted up with every mile. The riders stayed just close enough to be visible, just far enough to avoid confrontation. Following. Watching. As the sun started to set, Caleb rode up beside her. We need to make a decision. Either we find a defensible position and dig in, or we keep moving through the night. If we stop, they'll have us trapped. If we keep going, the cattle will collapse. Some of them are already running on empty. Eliza looked at the herd, at the stragglers barely keeping up, then back at the distant dust cloud. Every choice was wrong. Every option led somewhere bad. There's a rock formation about 3 miles ahead, she said. Passed it once with Thomas. It's got good sight lines, water if we dig. We make for that. All right. They pushed the cattle harder than was smart, and it cost them. Another cow went down before they reached the rocks, and they had to leave it behind. Eliza tried not to think about the math, about how many she was losing versus how many she needed to save. The formation was as she remembered, a cluster of red stone thrust up from the earth like broken teeth, creating a natural corral on one side and high ground on the other. Not perfect, but better than being caught in the open. They drove the cattle into the protected area and immediately set to work. Caleb took the high ground with his rifle, watching for the riders. Eliza started digging for water where she remembered Thomas finding it years ago. 15 minutes of digging yielded mud. 30 minutes yielded damp sand. 45 minutes brought up water, brown and gritty, but wet. She set up a makeshift trough and let the cattle drink in shifts, rationing what little there was. They crowded around it, desperate, pushing against each other. One of the weaker ones got knocked down and couldn't get back up. Eliza! Caleb's voice from above, sharp with warning. She climbed up to where he was positioned. He handed her the scope from his rifle and pointed. The riders had stopped about a 1/4 mile out. 5 of them, spread in a loose line, making no attempt to hide now. As she watched, one of them dismounted and started walking forward, hands visible and empty. Flag of parley, Caleb said. Or a trap. Only one way to find out. I'll go. It's my ranch, my fight. And if they're planning to shoot whoever walks out there, better it's me than you. Eliza wanted to argue, but he was already moving. She watched him climb down, watched him walk out to meet the approaching man with his hands loose and ready, despite appearing casual. They met halfway, talked. She couldn't hear the words from this distance, but she could read body language. The stranger did most of the talking. Caleb listened, shook his head once, twice. The stranger gestured back toward the other riders, said something else. Caleb's posture shifted slightly, still relaxed, but now with intent underneath it. The conversation ended. Both men walked back to their respective sides. The stranger mounted up, and all 5 riders turned and headed east, disappearing into the failing light. Caleb climbed back up. His face was unreadable. Well, Eliza demanded. Message from Hargrove. Says we're trespassing on his range, says if we're not turned around by morning, there'll be consequences. This isn't his range. It's open territory. You know that. I know that. But he's got 5 men willing to enforce his version of property lines, and we've got 2 rifles in a herd that can barely walk. So what'd you tell him? That we'd think about it. Like hell we will. Caleb looked at her for a long moment. Eliza, I'm with you. Whatever you decide, I'm with you. But you need to understand what you're choosing. This isn't just about the ranch anymore. We push forward, we're picking a fight with a man who's already killed your husband and gotten away with it. I know what I'm choosing, and I'm tired of running, same as you. Something flickered in his eyes. Approval, maybe, or recognition. All right then, we keep moving at first light, push hard for the valley. With luck, we make it before they catch up. And without luck? Then we make them regret trying to stop us. They took turns keeping watch that night. During Eliza's shift, she sat on the high rocks and looked out at the darkness, thinking about Thomas, wondering what he'd say about all this. Probably that she was being stubborn and reckless. Probably that he loved her anyway. She missed him with a physical ache that hadn't dulled even a little in the month since his death. Missed his laugh, his steady presence, the way he'd made her feel like anything was possible if they just worked hard enough. The world had been smaller when he was alive, more manageable. Now it felt vast and hostile, full of threats she couldn't anticipate or control. But she had Daniel to think about. Daniel, who needed to see that his mother didn't break when things got hard. Who needed to learn that sometimes you had to fight even when the odds were bad. And maybe she had Caleb too, though she wasn't sure what to make of that yet. He'd slotted into her life so easily, filling spaces she hadn't realized were empty. It should have felt wrong, another man in Thomas's place, even temporarily, but it didn't. It felt like survival. Dawn came gray and cold. They got the cattle moving before the sun cleared the horizon, pushing them north toward the valley that was still 2 days away. The animals were struggling now, moving on instinct and stubbornness, just like her. They made good time through the morning, but around noon the riders reappeared. This time there were more of them, 8, maybe 10, and they weren't keeping their distance. "They're going to try to turn us," Caleb said. "Let them try." But try they did. 3 riders broke off and circled ahead, positioning themselves to block the path. The rest fanned out on the flanks. It was a practiced maneuver, the kind you learned from years of managing cattle and controlling range. Eliza pulled her mare to a stop. The herd milled around, confused by the sudden halt. Caleb rode up beside her, rifle across his saddle. The lead rider approached. He was young, maybe 25, with a cocky set to his shoulders that made Eliza's jaw tighten. She recognized him, Jack Hargrove, Robert's nephew, known for being quick with his fists and slow with his thinking. "Mrs. Crow," he called out, "you need to turn these cattle around." "I need to do no such thing. This is open range." Mr. Hargrove says different. Mr. Hargrove doesn't own the whole territory, much as he'd like to. Jack's smile went thin. "See, that's where you're wrong. He owns enough. And what he doesn't own, he controls, which means you're trespassing. Show me a deed that says this land is his. Show me a territorial map. Show me anything besides your say-so. I don't need paperwork out here, ma'am. Just need enough men to back up your claim." He looked at Caleb. "How many you got? 2?" Caleb didn't respond, just sat easy in the saddle with his hand resting near his rifle. "Turn the cattle around," Jack said again. "We'll escort you back to your property line. Do this peaceful." "And if I don't?" "Then we'll turn them for you. Might lose a few in the process. That'd be unfortunate." It was a threat wrapped in politeness, and they all knew it. Eliza felt her temper rising, felt the urge to reach for her rifle and damn the consequences. But that was emotion talking, and emotion would get them killed. She looked at the men surrounding them, looked at her cattle, exhausted and thirsty, looked at Caleb, who met her eyes and gave the slightest shake of his head. "Not here. Not like this." "Fine," she said. "We'll turn around." Jack's smile widened. "Smart choice. But we're coming back, and next time I'll have the territorial marshal with me. You do that." He wheeled his horse around, cocky and confident. "Boys, help the lady get turned around." The riders moved in, shouting and waving their hats. The cattle, already spooked, panicked. They scattered in 3 directions, lowing in distress. Eliza tried to control it, tried to keep them together, but it was chaos. In the confusion, one of the riders got too close to a particularly ornery steer. The animal charged, caught the horse in the shoulder. The horse reared. The rider went flying, hit the ground hard. Everything stopped. The man lay there, not moving. Jack jumped off his horse, ran over. "Miller? Miller, you all right?" Miller groaned, rolled onto his side. "Leg, think it's broke." Jack's expression shifted from concern to anger. He looked up at Eliza and his eyes held something ugly. "Your animal did that. Your man spooked it. I don't give a damn. You're going to pay for this." He drew his pistol. Caleb's rifle was up before Jack cleared leather. The metallic click of the hammer cocking back echoed across the flat land. "Put it away," Caleb said. His voice was calm, but there was steel underneath. Jack froze, gun half drawn. The other riders reached for their weapons. Suddenly there were 8 guns pointing at 2, and the math was very bad. "You threatening me?" Jack asked. "I'm preventing something stupid. Your man got hurt because he wasn't paying attention. That's not her fault." "I say it is." "Then you're a fool." The word hung in the air like a match over dry tinder. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Jack holstered his gun. "We're done being polite," he said. "You got until sundown to get off this range. After that, Anything that happens is on you. He helped Miller onto a horse, and the whole group rode off without looking back. Eliza let out a breath she hadn't known she was holding. That went well. Could have gone worse. Could have gone better, too. They spent the next hour rounding up the scattered cattle. Lost 2 in the chaos, just wandered off into the scrub and couldn't be found. That left 13. Unlucky number. They headed south as ordered, but only for an hour. Then Caleb pulled up. "What are you doing?" Eliza asked. "Thinking. They're expecting us to head straight back to your ranch, right?" "That's what I told them we'd do. So let's not do that. There's another route to the valley, longer, rougher, but it skirts east around Hargrove's main territory. His men won't be watching there." "How do you know about it?" "Told you I'd been riding through. I pay attention to terrain." Eliza considered it. The cattle were exhausted. Taking the long route would add another full day to the drive, maybe 2. But going back meant surrender, meant giving up the only plan she had. "We'd need to move at night," she said. "Stay off the main paths." "Yeah. It's risky." "Everything is." She looked at him, this stranger who'd become her partner in what was increasingly looking like a suicide mission. "You're really committed to this, aren't you?" "I'm really committed to not letting bullies win." That decided it. "All right, we go east." They waited until full dark before moving. The cattle didn't like traveling at night, kept trying to stop and rest, but Eliza and Caleb pushed them onward. The moon was nearly full, which helped, but the terrain was treacherous, rocks and holes waiting to break a leg, arroyos that appeared out of nowhere. Around midnight, they stopped to let the cattle rest. Eliza sat on the ground, too tired to care about propriety or comfort. Caleb sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. "You married?" she asked suddenly. The question surprised them both. Caleb was quiet for a moment. "Was. Long time ago." "What happened?" "She died. Fever, during the war. I was off fighting, couldn't get back in time." "I'm sorry." "Me too." He picked up a stick, drew aimless patterns in the dirt. "That's part of why I've been moving. Felt like if I stayed still, I'd have to face what I lost. Easier to keep running." "Is it? Easier?" "No, just different." Eliza understood that. The urge to run, to leave the pain behind and start over somewhere new. She'd felt it every day since Thomas died. But running meant abandoning everything they'd built, meant teaching Daniel that when things got hard, you quit. "Thank you," she said, "for staying, for this." "Don't thank me yet. We're not there." "But you stayed anyway." He looked at her, and in the moonlight his face was half shadow, half silver. "Where else would I go?" It wasn't an answer, not really, but it was enough. They pushed on through the night and into the next day. The cattle were moving on pure stubbornness now, barely staying upright. Eliza wasn't much better. Her eyes burned from lack of sleep and every muscle ached, but the valley was close, had to be close. Late afternoon, Caleb pointed. "There." She looked where he indicated and saw it, a line of green cutting through the brown landscape, the unmistakable sign of water. The valley. They'd made it. The cattle sensed it too. Suddenly they had energy, pushing forward with renewed purpose. Eliza wanted to cry with relief, but was too tired for tears. They reached the creek an hour later. The water was clear and cold, fed by mountain runoff like Caleb had said. The cattle waded in and drank deep, and Eliza knelt on the bank and splashed water on her face, feeling human again for the first time in days. They'd done it. Against all odds, against Hargrove's threats and the unforgiving land and their own exhaustion, they'd actually done it. Caleb sat down next to her, boots in the water. "How long you want to stay?" "Long as it takes to get them healthy enough for market. 2 weeks, maybe 3. Hargrove's going to find us eventually." "I know, but by then, maybe it won't matter. Maybe we'll have already sold them." It was optimistic thinking, probably foolish. But sitting there by the water with the sun starting to set and the cattle finally peaceful, Eliza let herself believe it. They set up camp that night on a rise overlooking the creek, made a real fire, cooked a real meal. Eliza ate until she was actually full, and it felt like luxury. "What'll you do?" Caleb asked. "After you sell the cattle and pay the bank?" "Try to hold on. Maybe drill a new well, see if we can hit water deeper down. Maybe plant something that'll survive this drought. She paused. What'll you do? Hadn't thought that far ahead. You should. You can't drift forever. Why not? Because you're too good at what you do to waste it wandering. You could have your own place, build something that lasts. Caleb stared into the fire. Had that once. Didn't work out. So try again. Not that simple. Sure it is. You just decide you're done running, and then you stop. He looked at her, and there was something raw in his expression. You make it sound easy. It's not easy. Nothing worth doing is. But it's possible. They sat in silence after that, watching the fire burn down. Eliza felt sleep pulling at her, heavy and insistent. She should get up, check the cattle one more time, make sure everything was secure. But she was so tired. Get some rest, Caleb said. I'll take first watch. You sure? Yeah, you've been running on empty for days. She didn't argue, just found a flat spot and lay down. The ground was hard and the night was cold, but she was asleep before she could care about either. She woke to gunshots. Eliza rolled, grabbed her rifle, came up on one knee scanning for threats. Dawn was just breaking, the sky pink and gold. Caleb was already firing from behind a rock, and she could see muzzle flashes coming from the tree line 50 yards out. They'd been found. Eliza scrambled to the rocks where Caleb had taken position, keeping low as bullets kicked up dirt around her. Her heart slammed against her ribs, but her hand stayed steady as she brought the rifle up and sighted down the barrel. How many? She shouted over the gunfire. 6, maybe 7. Can't get a clear count. She spotted movement in the trees and fired. The recoil jarred her shoulder, but she worked the lever and fired again. Someone yelled, hit, or just scared. She couldn't tell. The cattle were panicking, running in all directions. 2 of them splashed through the creek and disappeared into the scrub on the far side. Another went down, caught by a stray bullet, and didn't get up. Eliza felt each loss like a physical blow, but couldn't spare attention for grief. Not yet. They're trying to scatter the herd, Caleb said. Split us up so we're easier targets. Then we don't split up. A rider broke from the tree line, charging toward their position with a rifle raised. Caleb shot him out of the saddle. The man hit the ground and didn't move. His horse kept running, reins trailing. The gunfire intensified. Whoever these men were, they had ammunition to spare and weren't shy about using it. Eliza and Caleb returned fire when they could, but they were outnumbered and exposed. This position wouldn't hold. We need to move, Caleb said, echoing her thoughts. Get to that rock outcrop, 30 yards south. Better cover. What about the cattle? Leave them. We're no good to them dead. He was right, but it felt like surrender. Still, Eliza nodded. On 3? On 3. They broke cover together, running low and fast. Bullets whined past them, too close. Eliza's boot caught on something and she stumbled, nearly went down. Caleb grabbed her arm without breaking stride, kept her upright. They dove behind the outcrop as gunfire chewed up the ground they'd just crossed. You hit? Caleb asked, breathing hard. No, you? I'm good. From this position, they had better sight lines but less protection on the flanks. A coordinated assault would overrun them in minutes. Eliza checked her ammunition, 8 rounds left in the rifle, 6 in her revolver. Not enough for a sustained fight. We can't win this, she said. I know. So what do we do? Caleb scanned the terrain, calculating. Creek's about 40 yards east. If we can make it there, follow it downstream, we might lose them in the rough country. That's a long run in the open. You got a better idea? She didn't. What about the cattle? Eliza, I'm not leaving them. That's 13 head. That's everything I've got left. And you won't be able to sell them if you're dead. A bullet sparked off the rock near her head, showering her with fragments. She flinched back, tasted blood where a chip had cut her lip. We'll circle back, Caleb said, once we've lost them. But right now we run or we die here. He was right. She knew he was right. But knowing and accepting were different things. Movement caught her eye. 3 men advancing from the north, using the scattered cattle for cover. They were closing the distance, setting up for a crossfire. Another minute and this position would become a kill box. All right, she said. We run. They laid down covering fire and then broke for the creek, legs pumping, lungs burning. Eliza heard shouting behind them, heard the crack of rifles and the buzz of near misses. Her feet hit water, and she kept going, splashing through the shallow creek and up the far bank. Something punched her in the side, hard enough to spin her around. She went down in the water, cold shock driving the air from her lungs. "Eliza!" Caleb was there, hands on her, pulling her up. "Where are you hit?" She looked down, saw blood spreading across her shirt. The wound was high on her left side, just below the ribs. It burned like someone had pressed a hot iron against her skin. "I'm okay," she gasped. "Keep moving. You're shot." "I know I'm shot. Move anyway." He got an arm around her waist and they stumbled downstream together. The creek bed was rocky and uneven, trying to trip them with every step. Behind them, the gunfire continued, but more scattered now. The attackers were regrouping, probably checking their own wounded. They made it maybe 100 yards before Eliza's legs gave out. She sat down hard in the shallow water, pressed a hand against her side. Blood welled between her fingers, warm and slick. "Let me see," Caleb said. "No time." "Let me see." She moved her hand. He peeled back her shirt, examined the wound with quick efficiency. His face gave nothing away, but she could read the tension in his jaw. "Through and through," he said. "Didn't hit anything vital, I don't think, but you're bleeding pretty good. Can you stop it?" "I can try." He tore a strip from his own shirt and bound it tight around her torso. The pressure made her gasp, but the bleeding slowed. "Good enough for now." "Can you walk?" he asked. "Can I do anything else?" He helped her up. They followed the creek for another mile, moving as fast as Eliza could manage. The water hid their tracks, and the high banks provided some cover. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit faded but didn't disappear entirely. By the time they found a defensible spot, an undercut in the creek bank that formed a shallow cave, Eliza was shaking from blood loss and shock. Caleb eased her down onto the dry sand and checked her wound again. "How bad?" she asked. "Bad enough. You need a doctor." "Nearest doctor is 2 days' ride back in Redemption." "Then we've got a problem." Eliza laughed, which hurt enough to make her regret it. "Just one?" Caleb didn't smile. He was looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Worry, maybe. Or guilt. "This is my fault," he said. "I should have been watching better. Should have seen them coming. You were on watch all night. You can't stay alert forever." "Still my job to keep you safe." "Nobody hired you for that." "Don't matter. It's still the job." Something in his voice made her chest tighten in a way that had nothing to do with the bullet wound. She reached out, caught his hand. "We're in this together," she said. "You don't get to shoulder all the blame any more than I do. We made the choices that got us here. Both of us." He looked at their joined hands like he was seeing something he'd forgotten existed. Then he nodded, squeezed her fingers once, and let go. "I'm going to scout around," he said. "See if they're still tracking us. You stay here, stay quiet. I'll be back in an hour." "Caleb, an hour. I promise." He slipped out of the cave and was gone before she could argue. Eliza sat there in the dim light, listening to the creek and trying not to think about all the things that could go wrong. The wound throbbed with every heartbeat. Her shirt was soaked through with blood. She felt cold despite the morning heat. Daniel's face appeared in her mind. What would happen to him if she died out here? He'd end up with her sister in Kansas, probably. Margaret was decent enough, but she'd never understood why Eliza wanted to stay on the ranch. Why she fought so hard for something that seemed to bring nothing but trouble. "Because it's mine," Eliza thought. "Because Thomas built it with his hands and his sweat, and I'll be damned if I let someone steal it. Because Daniel deserves to know his parents didn't quit when things got hard." She must have dozed because the next thing she knew, Caleb was shaking her shoulder gently. "Don't fall asleep," he said. "Not with blood loss." "I'm awake." "Sure you are." He had his canteen out, held it to her lips. "Drink." The water was warm and tasted like metal, but she drank anyway. It helped clear her head a little. "They give up?" she asked. "No, they're searching the area in pairs. We've got maybe an hour before they work their way down here." "Then we need to move." "You need to rest." "Can't rest if we're dead." He couldn't argue with that. He helped her to her feet and they started moving downstream again, staying in the water where possible. Eliza's side screamed with every step, but she bit down on the pain and kept going. The alternative wasn't acceptable. They traveled for what felt like hours, but was probably less. The sun climbed higher, turning the creek bed into an oven. Eliza's vision started to blur around the edges. She stumbled more frequently, had to lean on Caleb more than she wanted to admit. Finally, he called a halt in a spot where the creek curved sharply, and a stand of cottonwoods provided shade. Eliza collapsed against a trunk and concentrated on breathing. "We can't keep this up," Caleb said. "Got to." "Eliza, you're about to pass out. We need to hole up somewhere, let you recover." "They'll find us." "Maybe, but if we keep running like this, you're going to bleed out or go into shock. Either way, same result." She wanted to argue but couldn't find the energy. Her side felt like it was on fire, and her thoughts kept slipping sideways, losing focus. "The cattle," she said. "Forget the cattle." "Can't. That's everything. That's the ranch. That's Daniel's future. It's not worth your life. It's worth exactly my life. That's what you're not getting. Without the ranch, without something to hold on to, what's the point? I might as well have died with Thomas." Caleb's expression hardened. "Don't talk like that." "Why not? It's true." "It's not true and you know it. Your boy needs you alive, not martyred for some piece of dirt." The words stung because they hit close to something Eliza didn't want to examine. The part of her that wondered if she was fighting for the ranch, or fighting to avoid feeling the full weight of Thomas's death, if keeping busy kept the grief at bay. "I'm sorry," Caleb said after a moment. "That was out of line." "No, you're probably right." She closed her eyes, feeling the exhaustion pull at her. "I'm just so tired of losing. Feels like the world's been taking pieces of me for years and I don't have much left to give." "Then don't give any more. Take instead." "Take what?" "Whatever you need. Hargrove wants to push, you push back harder. Bank wants their money, you make them wait. Town wants to judge you, let them choke on their opinions. You're tougher than all of them combined." Something in his voice made her open her eyes. He was looking at her with an intensity that felt almost physical. "You really believe that?" she asked. "I've seen you drive half-dead cattle through hostile territory with a bullet wound you won't even acknowledge is serious." "Yeah, I believe it." Despite everything, Eliza smiled. "You might be crazier than I am." "Probably." They rested there for 20 minutes, watching the sun track across the sky through the cottonwood leaves. Eliza felt her strength returning in small increments. Not much, but enough. "We should keep moving," she said finally. Caleb helped her up and they pressed on. The creek eventually joined a larger stream, which meant more water but also more exposure. They had to leave the relative safety of the banks and strike out across open country. By mid-afternoon, they'd put several miles between themselves and the ambush site. No sign of pursuit, but that didn't mean much. Hargrove's men knew this territory better than they did. They crested a low rise, and Eliza stopped so suddenly that Caleb nearly ran into her. "What?" he asked. She pointed. Below them, in a shallow valley, was a small settlement. Maybe a dozen buildings clustered around a trading post, with corrals and a water tower. Smoke rose from several chimneys despite the heat. "You know this place?" Caleb asked. "Pioneer's Rest. Thomas and I stopped here once, years ago. It's a way station for cattle drives heading north." "Think they're friendly?" "Only one way to find out." They approached carefully, Caleb keeping one hand near his revolver, but the few people they saw seemed more curious than hostile. An old man sitting outside the trading post watched them with rheumy eyes. "Help you folks?" he called. "Need supplies," Eliza said, "and maybe someone who knows doctoring." The old man took in her bloody shirt and Caleb's wary stance. "Got both. Martha runs the post. She's fair with medicine. Cost you, though. I can pay." "Then come on in." The trading post was dim and cool after the brutal sun. Shelves lined the walls, stocked with everything from ammunition to canned goods to bolts of fabric. A woman appeared from the back, Martha presumably. She was maybe 60, built solid with sharp eyes that missed nothing. "Someone's hurt," she said flatly. "Me," Eliza admitted. "Gunshot. Through and through." Martha came around the counter, all business. "Let's see." Eliza lifted her shirt. The makeshift bandage was soaked through and the skin around the wound was angry red. "Who shot you?" Martha asked. "Does it matter?" "It does if they're following you here. I don't need that kind of trouble." Caleb spoke up. "We lost them hours ago. This is just a supply stop." Martha looked between them, clearly skeptical. But after a moment she nodded. "Back room. I'll clean it proper and rebandage. But if gunmen show up at my door, you're on your own. Fair enough. The back room was small and cluttered with inventory. Martha had Eliza sit on a wooden crate while she gathered supplies. The cleaning hurt worse than getting shot had, alcohol burning through the wound like liquid fire. Eliza gritted her teeth and didn't make a sound. You're lucky, Martha said. Another inch lower and it would have hit your kidney. Another inch forward and you'd have a hole in your lung. As it is, you'll live if you don't do anything stupid, like riding for 3 days straight. I'll try to avoid that. You do that. Martha applied a clean bandage, wrapped it tight. Keep this dry, change it twice a day. If you start running a fever, find a real doctor. What do I owe you? $5 for the supplies, another $5 for the service. Eliza paid from the dwindling supply in her pocket. Martha counted the bills and tucked them away without comment. Outside, Caleb was talking to the old man. They looked up as Eliza emerged. How you feeling? Caleb asked. Like I got shot. But better than before. Good. Because we've got news. Charlie here says there's a cattle buyer coming through day after tomorrow, out of Denver, looking for stock to drive north. Eliza's heart jumped. Here? He's coming here? Charlie nodded. Twice a year, regular as clockwork. Buys whatever's on offer, pays fair prices. Does he buy small lots? Buys whatever you got, long as it's healthy enough to survive the drive. It was exactly what they needed. Almost too perfect. Eliza looked at Caleb, saw her own cautious hope reflected back. Our cattle are scattered, she said. We'd need to round them up, get them here. How many are you talking about? Charlie asked. 13 head. Maybe less now, depending on how many survived the attack. Attack? Martha had come to the doorway, arms crossed. You said you lost them. We did. Doesn't mean they didn't try. Martha and Charlie exchanged looks. Charlie spat into the dust. This got something to do with Hargrove? How'd you know that? Only man around here who'd ambush someone over cattle. He's been pushing smaller ranchers out for years trying to build an empire. Charlie's expression soured. Lost my own place to him 5 years back. Now I just sit here and watch the world turn. I'm sorry, Eliza said. Don't be sorry. Just don't let him win, he pointed north. Your cattle scattered from where? Valley about 8 miles back, near the big creek. I know it. If they're still alive, they'll probably stay near water. You want help rounding them up? We can't pay. Didn't ask for pay. Asked if you wanted help. Eliza looked at this old man who had no reason to risk anything for her and felt something crack in her chest. Kindness. She'd almost forgotten what it looked like. We'd appreciate any help you can give, she said quietly. Then we leave at dawn. I'll bring my grandson. Boy's good with cattle. We'll see what we can salvage. That night they stayed in a small room above the trading post. Martha charged them $1 for the space but threw in a hot meal. Eliza ate mechanically, tasting nothing, her mind already racing ahead to tomorrow. You should rest, Caleb said. Let me and Charlie handle the roundup. Not a chance. Eliza, I said no. Those are my cattle, my responsibility. I'm going. He looked like he wanted to argue but knew better. Instead, he just nodded and went back to his own plate. Later, lying on the narrow bed in the dark, Eliza listened to Caleb's breathing from where he'd bedded down on the floor. She thought about everything that had happened in the past week. The confrontation with Hargrove, the desperate drive north, the ambush, getting shot. It felt like years compressed into days. You awake? She asked quietly. Yeah. Thank you for all of this. You didn't sign on for getting shot at. Neither did you, but here we are. I mean it, though. You could have left a dozen times. Should have left. Where would I go that's better than here? Anywhere that's not getting you killed. Caleb was quiet for a long moment. I told you I was tired of running. Meant it. Whatever happens next, I'd rather face it standing beside someone who's worth fighting for than die somewhere alone because I was too scared to stay. The words settled between them, heavy with meaning neither of them was quite ready to name. I'm glad you stayed, Eliza said finally. Me too. She fell asleep to that thought, and for the first time in weeks, her dreams weren't nightmares. Dawn came cold and clear. Charlie showed up with his grandson, a lanky kid named Pete, who couldn't have been more than 16. They had extra horses and rope, ready to work. You sure you're up for this? Charlie asked Eliza, eyeing her bandaged side. I'll manage. They rode out as the sun broke over the horizon, heading back toward the valley. Eliza's wound ached, but the pain was manageable, and Martha's bandaging held. She focused on that instead of the fear gnawing at her gut about what they'd find. The valley looked different in full daylight. The grass was trampled, the creek muddied. They found the first dead cow about a mile in, one of hers, shot through the head. A waste. Pure spite. Keep looking, Charlie said. Live ones will have moved downwind, probably. He was right. They found 3 cows grazing in a hollow about 2 miles downstream, then 2 more near a stand of trees. By noon, they'd recovered 8 head, including the ornery steer that had kicked Miller's horse. That's not bad, Charlie said. With 8, you can still make a sale worth having. We had 13, Eliza said, and now you got 8. Could be worse. Could be none. They drove the recovered cattle back toward Pioneer's Rest, moving slow to keep them together. Eliza watched them plod along and tried to do the math. 8 head wouldn't bring what 13 would have, but it might be enough. Maybe. If the buyer was generous and the cattle looked better than they were. They were maybe 3 miles from the settlement when Pete called out, "Riders coming!" Eliza's hand went to her rifle. Please not now. Not when they were this close. But the riders that appeared weren't Hargrove's men. There were only 2 of them, and they wore badges. The lead rider was a big man with a silver beard and eyes like chips of flint. He pulled up about 20 yards away and surveyed the group with professional assessment. That's far enough, Caleb said, rifle ready. The man held up both hands, showing they were empty. Easy there. Name's Marshal Hendricks, Territorial Office. This is Deputy Ross. We're looking for a Mrs. Eliza Crow. Eliza nudged her horse forward. I'm Eliza Crow. Hendricks studied her for a moment. Ma'am, we've had a complaint filed against you. Cattle theft, trespassing, assault, serious charges. Filed by who? Robert Hargrove. Says you stole cattle from his range and shot one of his men when confronted. Eliza felt cold fury rise in her chest. That's a lie. These are my cattle from my ranch. Hargrove's been trying to force me off my land since my husband died. He had his men attack us while we were grazing on open range. You have proof of ownership? I have bills of sale back at my ranch. And the shooting? His man got thrown from his horse when a steer spooked. That's not assault, that's stupidity. Hendricks's expression didn't change. I'm going to need you to come into redemption, answer these charges formal-like. Marshal, I've got a buyer coming day after tomorrow. I need to make this sale or I lose my ranch. Well, that's unfortunate, but the law's the law. Caleb moved his horse up beside Eliza's. She's telling the truth. I was there for all of it. Hargrove's men ambushed us at dawn, shot her for no reason except she wouldn't turn around when they told her to. And who are you? Caleb Vance. I work for Mrs.
Crow. You got proof of that? My word's all I got. Hendricks looked between them, clearly weighing options. Finally, he said, here's what's going to happen. You're going to drive those cattle to Pioneer's Rest and wait there. I'm going to ride to Hargrove's ranch and hear his side. Day after tomorrow, when the buyer shows up, we'll all have a conversation. If your story holds and the cattle are yours legal, you make your sale and we forget the charges. If it doesn't, then what? Eliza asked. Then you're under arrest and the cattle get impounded pending trial. It wasn't fair, but it was better than being arrested on the spot. Eliza nodded. All right, you'll find Hargrove about 15 miles north, if he's at his main ranch. I know where he is. Hendricks tipped his hat. Mrs. Crow, Mr. Vance. See you in 2 days. The marshals rode off. Eliza watched them go, feeling the fragile hope she'd built start to crack. This is bad, she said. Maybe not, Charlie offered. Hendricks is tough, but he's fair. If he hears both sides, he'll know who's lying. Or he'll believe the man with money and power over a widow woman who can't prove half of what she claims. Then we make sure you can prove it. Pete, you ride to Mrs. Crow's ranch. Get those bills of sale. I'll stay here, make sure nobody tries anything before the marshal gets back. The boy nodded and took off at a gallop. Eliza felt Caleb's hand on her arm. It's going to work out, he said. You don't know that. No, but I believe it anyway. She wanted to share his faith, but couldn't quite get there. The world had taught her to expect the worst, and the worst had a way of showing up right when you started to hope.
They got the cattle penned at Pioneer's Rest and spent the next day waiting. Eliza paced, checked her wound, paced some more. Caleb tried to distract her with conversation, but gave up after a while. Some kinds of anxiety you just had to sit with. Pete returned late that afternoon with the bills of sale. Eliza went through them 3 times, making sure everything was in order. The papers proved ownership, but they didn't prove the cattle she had now were the same ones listed. It would come down to her word against Hargrove's. The buyer arrived right on schedule the next morning, a weathered man named Sullivan who'd been driving cattle north for 30 years. Hendricks and his deputy showed up an hour later, and then, like something out of a bad dream, Robert Hargrove rode in with 6 of his men. Everyone gathered in front of the trading post. Martha stood in the doorway, watching with grim interest. Charlie positioned himself near Eliza, and Caleb stood close enough that she could feel his presence like a wall at her back. Hendricks dismounted. "All right, let's get this sorted. Mr. Hargrove, you've filed charges. State your case." Hargrove looked confident, like a man who'd already won. "Simple matter, Marshal. Mrs. Crow here took cattle onto my range without permission. When my men confronted her, she and her hired gun shot at them, wounded one of my men. That's not what happened," Eliza cut in. "Let him finish," Hendricks said. Hargrove smiled. "As I was saying, they shot one of my men and fled. Then they stole cattle from my herd to replace the ones they lost to the elements. Criminal behavior all around." "Marshal, that's a damn lie," Caleb said, voice hard. "You'll get your turn." Hendricks looked at Eliza. "Mrs. Crow?" She laid out the truth, every piece of it. The drought, the desperate drive north, the ambush, being shot. She showed him her bills of sale, showed him her wound. Hendricks listened without expression. When she finished, he turned to Sullivan. "You're the expert here. Take a look at those cattle. Tell me what you see." Sullivan walked over to the pen, examined the 8 head carefully. He checked their brands, their condition, took his time. Everyone waited. Finally, he came back. "They're wearing the Crow brand, registered and legal. Been hard driven recently, underfed before that. I'd say they're exactly what Mrs. Crow claims, ranch cattle, pushed to the edge and brought to water." "They could have been rebranded," Hargrove said. "Could have been. But they weren't. Brand's old, well-heeled. These marks are months old, not days." Hendricks nodded slowly. "Mr. Hargrove, you got proof these are your cattle?" "I have my men's testimony." "That's not proof, that's opinion." "Are you calling me a liar, Marshal?" "I'm saying your story doesn't match the evidence. Mrs. Crow has bills of sale, has brands that check out, has injuries consistent with her version of events. You've got nothing but the word of men on your payroll." Hargrove's face went red. "I own half this territory. My word should be enough." "Maybe it is with the local sheriff, but I answer to territorial law, and territorial law says she's in the clear." Hendricks looked at Eliza. "Charges dropped, Mrs. Crow. Sell your cattle." The relief was so intense Eliza had to lock her knees to keep from swaying. Beside her, Caleb let out a breath, but Hargrove wasn't done. "This isn't over." "Yeah, it is," Hendricks said. "And if I hear about you or your men harassing this woman again, I'll come back with a warrant. We clear?" For a long moment, Hargrove just stared, fury radiating off him. Then he turned his horse and rode off without another word, his men following. Sullivan cleared his throat. "Well, that was exciting. Now, about these cattle, I can give you $12 a head, 96 total." It was less than Eliza had hoped, but more than she'd feared. "Deal." They shook on it. Sullivan counted out the money in cash, loaded the cattle, and was gone within the hour. Just like that, weeks of struggle condensed into a single transaction. Eliza stood there holding $96 and feeling like she'd won and lost at the same time. The money would cover the banknote with a little left over, but she'd lost 5 head, nearly died, and made an enemy who wouldn't forget. "You did it," Caleb said. "We did it." Charlie clapped her on the shoulder. "That took more guts than most men I know have got. Your husband would have been proud." The mention of Thomas brought unexpected tears. Eliza blinked them back, nodded her thanks. "What now?" Caleb asked. "Now we go home, pay the bank, figure out what comes next." They left Pioneer's Rest the following morning, riding back toward the ranch with lighter saddlebags but heavier thoughts.
The land looked the same as when they'd left, brutal and beautiful and unforgiving.
But something in Eliza had changed. She'd fought and bled and survived, and that had to count for something. When the ranch finally came into view 3 days later, she felt her chest tighten. Home. Still standing, still hers. But as they got closer, something felt wrong. The barn door was open. Smoke stains darkened the side of the house, and in the yard, where her few remaining possessions should have been, there was nothing but ash. No, Eliza breathed. They rode in fast. The destruction was systematic. The well had been fouled with dead animals. The fences were torn down. The barn had been partially burned. And nailed to the front door was a notice from the bank, stating that due to property damage and concerns about loan security, the note was being called in full immediately. Eliza sat on her horse and looked at the ruins of everything she'd fought for. All that struggle, all that blood and pain and determination, and it hadn't mattered. Hargrove had won anyway, just by waiting until she was gone and then destroying what she couldn't defend. She dismounted slowly, walked to the house. Inside was worse. Furniture overturned, dishes smashed, Thomas's books torn apart. Deliberate cruelty. Caleb appeared in the doorway. Eliza, get out. Eliza, please, get out. She screamed it, all the rage and grief and exhaustion pouring out in those 2 words. Caleb left. She heard his boots on the porch, heard him walk away. She sank down among the ruins of her life, and finally let herself cry. The tears didn't last long. Eliza had learned years ago that crying didn't fix anything, didn't put food on the table or water in the well. She wiped her face with the back of her hand, stood up, and walked back outside into the harsh afternoon light. Caleb was in the yard, examining the fouled well. He looked up when she appeared, but didn't say anything. Smart man. How bad is it? She asked, her voice steady now. Bad. They dumped at least 2 dead animals down there. Water's contaminated. We'd need to drain it completely, clean it out, wait for it to refill. Weeks of work? Maybe months. And the barn? Structure's mostly intact, but they burned through half the hay storage. What they didn't burn, they scattered. Eliza walked around the property, cataloging the damage with a detached part of her mind that had gone cold and sharp. The hen house was destroyed, chickens gone. The vegetable garden she'd been nursing along was trampled flat. Even the porch swing Thomas had built for her was smashed to kindling. This wasn't just vandalism. This was a message written in destruction. You don't belong here. They did this while we were gone, she said. Probably the same day we left. Had plenty of time to be thorough. Looks that way. And the bank notice? Caleb pulled it off the door, handed it to her. She read it twice, feeling the trap close around her with each word. Due to property damage and inability to maintain loan security, full payment required within 7 days. After that, foreclosure proceedings would begin. They planned this, she said. Hargrove filed those charges to keep me away long enough for his men to do this. Then he made sure the bank would find out, probably told them himself. Now, even if I pay the $300, they can claim the property's too damaged to serve as collateral. Can they do that? Legally? Probably not. But who's going to fight them on it? The sheriff's in Hargrove's pocket, most of the town too. By the time anyone stepped in, the ranch would already be sold at auction to the only bidder who'd show up. Caleb's jaw tightened. So we fight it anyway. With what? I've got $96 in a property that's been systematically destroyed. Even if I could prove Hargrove did this, what then? His lawyers would tie it up in court for years while I starve. Then we rebuild, fix what we can, show the bank the property's still valuable. In 7 days? Caleb, look around. This would take months to fix properly, and that's if I had money for materials and labor, which I don't. She hated the defeat in her own voice, hated that she was standing in her own yard talking about giving up. But reality was reality, and reality said she'd lost. Caleb walked over to her, close enough that she had to look up to meet his eyes. You remember what you told me that night at the camp about how you were tired of losing? That was before. Nothing's changed. They hit you hard. I'll give them that. But you're still standing. The house is still here. The land is still yours, at least for 7 more days. That's not nothing. It's not enough either. Maybe not alone. But you're not alone. Something in his voice made her stop, really look at him. He'd stayed through everything. The ambush, the gunfight, the desperate run to safety.
He had no stake in this ranch, no reason to keep fighting except that he'd decided to. And here he was, covered in dust and dried blood, telling her not to quit. "Why?" she asked. "Why do you care so much about this?" He was quiet for a moment, looking out at the ruined yard. "When my wife died, I gave up.
Sold our place for nothing, took to the road, convinced myself that not caring was the same as not hurting, spent 5 years proving myself wrong." He looked back at her. "Then I rode into your yard and you offered me work and a meal, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like maybe there was still something worth fighting for. Maybe I'm not fighting for the ranch. Maybe I'm fighting for the idea that some things are worth holding on to, even when it's hard." Eliza felt something shift in her chest, some locked door opening just a crack. "That's a pretty speech. It's the truth. The truth doesn't pay bills or fix wells." "No, but it's a start." She wanted to argue, wanted to list all the practical reasons why this was hopeless, but standing there looking at him, at this man who'd become more than just hired help somewhere along the way, she couldn't quite make herself do it. "All right," she said finally, 7 days. We see what we can salvage, but if it's not enough, then we'll deal with that when we get there." They started with the well. It was the most critical piece. Without water, nothing else mattered. They spent the rest of that day rigging up a pulley system to haul out the dead animals. The smell was horrific, made worse by the heat. Eliza tied a bandana over her face and tried not to gag. By sunset, they'd removed 3 dead sheep and a dog, all bloated and rotting. Eliza didn't recognize the dog, which meant Hargrove's men had probably brought it specifically for this purpose. The cruelty of it made her sick. "We'll need to drain the well completely," Caleb said, examining the water. "Then scrub it down with lye, let it air out, wait for fresh water to seep back in." "How long?" "Week minimum, probably 2. "We don't have 2 weeks. Then we make do with what we can haul from the creek." The creek was 3 miles away. Hauling enough water for 2 people and the few chickens they might recover would take hours every day. But it was what they had. That night, they made camp in the yard because the house still smelled like smoke and destruction. Eliza lay on her bedroll looking up at the stars and wondering where Daniel was. Mrs. Chen would have taken good care of him, but he'd be worried, maybe scared. She needed to get word to him that she was all right, that they were still fighting. "You should sleep," Caleb said from his own bedroll a few feet away. "Can't." "Try anyway. Tomorrow's going to be long. They're all going to be long." Silence settled between them. An owl called from somewhere in the darkness, hunting. "Caleb?" Eliza said. "Yeah?" "When this is over, one way or another, you'll move on, right? Find your own place, build something that lasts like we talked about." Another pause. "Is that what you want?" The question caught her off guard. Was it what she wanted? A week ago, the answer would have been obvious. He was temporary help, nothing more. But now, after everything they'd been through, "I don't know what I want anymore," she admitted. "Everything I thought I knew got burned down along with the barn." "Then maybe we both figure it out as we go." She fell asleep to that thought and woke before dawn to Caleb already moving around the camp. He had coffee going, which felt like a small miracle. "Where'd you get the coffee?" she asked. "Had some in my saddlebag. Been saving it." They drank it black and too hot, standing in the yard as the sun turned the eastern sky orange and red. Then they got to work. Over the next 3 days, they accomplished more than Eliza would have thought possible. They cleaned out the well and got it draining properly. They salvaged what they could from the barn and organized it into something functional. They repaired the worst of the fence damage using materials scavenged from the parts that were completely destroyed. On the 4th day, Sam Price showed up. Eliza heard the wagon before she saw it, and her hand went automatically to the rifle before she recognized the familiar sound of Sam's old mule. She walked out to meet him, wary. Sam pulled up and climbed down, looking uncomfortable. "Eliza." "Sam. Heard about what happened here. Wanted to come by, see if you were all right. We're managing." He looked around at the damage, at the work they'd done. "Hell of a thing, someone doing this." "You know who did it?" "Got my suspicions. So does half the town." He reached into the wagon bed, pulled out a crate. "Brought you some supplies, flour, beans, coffee, some nails and tools that might help with the repairs." Eliza stared at the crate. "Sam, I can't pay for this right now." Didn't ask you to. Call it a loan. Pay me back when you can. He set the crate down, then pulled out an envelope. Also brought you this. Came through the post office yesterday. She took the envelope, recognized the handwriting. Margaret, her sister. Inside was a short letter and a bank draft for $50. Heard about Thomas, Margaret had written in her cramped script. Know you're proud, but family helps family. Don't argue, just take it. The boys are grown now. We have enough to spare. Come to Kansas if things don't work out there. Love, M. Eliza read it twice, feeling her throat tighten. $50 wouldn't save the ranch, but combined with what she had from the cattle sale, it might be enough to pay the bank and buy some time. Good news? Sam asked. Yeah, good news. After Sam left, Eliza showed the letter to Caleb. He read it and smiled. See? You're not as alone as you think. Still leaves us short. Even with this, I've got maybe $150. The note's for $300. So we find the other half. Where? Money doesn't grow on drought-dead grass. Caleb thought for a moment. What about the cattle buyer, Sullivan? He paid $12 a head, which is low. Maybe we can negotiate selling him something else. Horses, equipment, anything with value. I already sold him everything I could spare. Then we think bigger. The ranch itself. What's it worth? 200 acres with a house and outbuildings? Used to be worth $5,000, maybe more. Now, damaged like this? She shook her head. Maybe $3,000 if I could find a buyer who wasn't Hargrove. And if you could find that buyer, you'd have enough to pay the bank, right? Sure, but then I wouldn't have a ranch. You'd have the land, could lease back the house and outbuildings, pay rent until you rebuild your stake. It was a crazy idea, selling to stay, renting her own home. But crazy was starting to look like the only option left. Who would buy it under those terms? She asked. I don't know, but it's worth asking around. They spent the 5th day riding into town. Eliza needed to talk to the bank anyway, see if there was any flexibility on the payment deadline. She wasn't optimistic, but had to try. The town looked the same as always, but people's reactions to her had changed. Some folks crossed the street to avoid talking to her. Others stared openly. A few nodded with what might have been respect or might have been pity. At the bank, Mr. Winters, the manager, saw her immediately. That wasn't a good sign. When bankers made time for you without an appointment, it usually meant bad news. Mrs. Crow, he said, gesturing to a chair, I was wondering when you'd come in. I'm here to discuss the payment terms on my note. I'm afraid there's not much to discuss. The terms are clear. $300 due in 3 days. Given the damage to the property, we're not in a position to extend or renegotiate. Mr. Winters, that damage wasn't my doing. Someone vandalized my property while I was away. I can prove, I'm sure you can. But the bank's position isn't about blame, it's about risk. The property no longer provides adequate security for the loan. I have $150. I can pay half now, the rest within 60 days. Winters shook his head. I'm sorry. It has to be the full amount. Then give me 90 days to find a buyer. I'll sell the ranch, pay you in full. Everyone walks away whole. To who? The only person interested in buying ranches around here is Robert Hargrove. Yeah, I know. Eliza leaned forward. Tell me something, Mr. Winters. Did Hargrove put pressure on you to call in my note early? Winters' face went carefully blank. That's a serious accusation. It's a serious question. For a long moment they stared at each other. Then Winters sighed. Mrs. Crow, I have a bank to run. Mr. Hargrove is one of my largest depositors. If he expresses concern about the stability of other accounts, you listen, because he's got money and I don't. Because he's a sound financial partner and your account is in default. It's not in default yet. I still have 3 days. Then I suggest you use them wisely. Winters stood, indicating the meeting was over. $300, Mrs. Crow. 3 days. After that, the property goes to auction. Outside, Caleb was waiting with the horses. He took one look at her face and didn't ask. They rode in silence back toward the ranch, Eliza's mind churning through options and finding none that worked. They were about halfway home when they saw the smoke. That's coming from your place, Caleb said, already spurring his horse to a gallop. Eliza followed, fear making her reckless. They'd left the property empty. If someone had come back, if they'd finished the job, They crested the last rise and saw it. The house was on fire, flames pouring from the windows, smoke billowing into the sky. And in the yard, on horseback, watching it burn, Jack Hargrove and 3 of his men. Eliza didn't think. She drew her rifle and fired, the shot going wide but close enough to scatter the horses. Jack and his men wheeled around, saw her coming, and bolted. She wanted to chase them, wanted to shoot them out of their saddles and make them pay. But the house was burning, and chasing wouldn't save it. They dismounted at a run. The fire was already out of control, too big to fight with the limited water they had. Caleb ran inside anyway, trying to save what he could. He came out seconds later with an armful of papers and Thomas's rifle, coughing from the smoke. "It's gone," he said. "Whole thing's going up." Eliza stood there and watched her home burn. The home where she'd lived with Thomas, where Daniel had been born, where every piece of her married life had unfolded. The walls collapsed inward with a roar, sending sparks high into the air. The roof went next, timbers crashing down in a shower of flame. By the time the fire burned itself out, there was nothing left but a smoking foundation and ash. "They couldn't beat you fair," Caleb said quietly, "so they burned you out." Eliza walked to where the front door used to be. Heat still radiated from the ruins. She could see the outline of where the kitchen had been, where Daniel's room had stood. All gone. "I'm done," she heard herself say. "Eliza, I mean it. I'm done fighting. They win. Hargrove wins. I'll take whatever he offers for the land and leave. Go to Kansas, start over where people aren't trying to kill me." "You don't mean that." She turned on him, all her rage and grief pouring out. "Don't tell me what I mean. Look at this. They burned my house down, shot me, destroyed my well, killed my cattle, and now they've burned my house. What's left to fight for?" "The land. Your son's future. Your husband's legacy." "Thomas is dead. His legacy is a pile of ash and a loan I can't pay. And my son's future isn't worth my life." Caleb grabbed her shoulders, not rough but firm. "Listen to me. You give up now? You teach Daniel that when things get hard, you quit. You show him that bullies win if they just hit hard enough. Is that really what you want?" "I want to stop hurting." "I know, but pain ends. Regret doesn't." He let go of her, stepped back. "I'm not going to tell you what to do. This is your choice, your life. But before you make it, think about what you told me that night by the camp, about being tired of losing. You give up now, you lose everything. Not just the ranch, your self-respect, your son's respect, the knowledge that you fought as hard as you could." Eliza sank down onto a piece of fallen timber, all the fight draining out of her. "I don't know if I have anything left to fight with." "Yeah, you do. You've got me. You've got people like Sam and Charlie who are willing to help. You've got the law on your side if we can just get to it." "The law?" She laughed bitterly. "The local sheriff won't touch Hargrove. The marshal already ruled in my favor once, and it didn't stop this. Then we go higher. Territorial court. Federal court if we have to. Someone will listen. And while we're doing that, what do I tell the bank? What do I tell Daniel when he asks where our home went?" Caleb sat down beside her. "You tell them the truth, that someone tried to break you and failed, that you're still standing." She looked at the ruins, at the smoke still rising into the sky, still standing. It didn't feel like it. It felt like everything had been taken from her, and she was just too stubborn to admit it. But maybe that was enough. Maybe being too stubborn to quit was the same thing as still having fight left. "I need to see Daniel," she said finally. "Need to tell him what's happened, that I'm all right. We can ride to town tonight, get him from Mrs. Chen's. And then what? Where do we stay? The barn's still partially intact. We can make it work short term." It was a terrible plan. Living in a half-burned barn with winter coming, no house, no money, nothing but the land and each other. But it was a plan, and right now that was more than she'd had 5 minutes ago. "All right," she said, "but we do this smart. No more charging in without thinking. We need evidence, witnesses, something that'll make the law actually do its job." "Agreed. And we need money. I'm still $150 short on the bank payment." Caleb reached into his pocket, pulled out a small leather pouch. "I've got $80. Saved from before, was planning to use it to get my own place someday. But this seems more important." Eliza stared at the pouch. "I can't take your savings?" "You're not taking it. I'm investing it. In this ranch, in this fight, in..."
He hesitated. In us. The word hung between them, loaded with meaning neither of them had fully acknowledged yet. Us. Not you and me separately, but together. Partners in something more than just survival. Caleb, I don't even know if there's going to be a ranch to invest in. Then we'll find out together. She took the pouch, felt the weight of it. $80. Combined with what she had, that brought her to $230. Still 70 short, but closer. I'll pay you back, she said. With interest. I know you will. They rode into town as the sun was setting, the smoking ruins of the house fading into the distance behind them. Eliza felt hollowed out, scraped clean of everything but the basic instinct to survive. But somewhere in that hollowness was a small, hard core of anger that wouldn't let her quit. Mrs. Chen's house was near the edge of town, a neat little place with a garden out front. Daniel came running the moment he saw them, throwing himself at Eliza so hard she nearly fell off her horse. Mama, you're back, you're all right. She held him tight, breathing in the smell of him, soap and sunshine and little boy. I'm all right, baby, I'm all right. Mrs. Chen said you were on a trip. She wouldn't tell me anything else. I was, but I'm back now. She looked down at his upturned face, saw Thomas's eyes looking back at her. Listen, Daniel, some bad things have happened. The house burned down. We're going to have to stay in the barn for a while. His face went pale. Burned down? How? Some people who don't want us to keep the ranch. But we're not giving up. We're going to fight to keep it. The bad men who hurt you before? She'd forgotten Daniel had been there when she came home with the bullet wound, had seen the blood. Yeah, them. Are they going to come back? Maybe. But Caleb and I are ready this time. Daniel looked at Caleb, something calculating in his young face. Are you going to stay, or are you going to leave like everyone else? The question was sharp, pointed, adult in a way that made Eliza's heart ache. He was too young to be this wary of abandonment. Caleb dismounted, came over to crouch at Daniel's level. I'm staying, for as long as your mama needs me. I'm staying. You promise? I promise. Daniel studied him for a long moment, then nodded. Okay. Mrs. Chen appeared on the porch, took in the scene with shrewd eyes. You look like you've been through hell, Eliza Crow. That's about right. Come inside. Get some food in you before you fall over. They ate in Mrs. Chen's kitchen, a simple meal that tasted better than anything Eliza had eaten in weeks. The old woman didn't ask questions, just fed them and let them sit in peace. Daniel stuck close to Eliza's side, like he was afraid she'd disappear if he looked away. After dinner, Mrs. Chen pulled Eliza aside. I heard what happened at your place. The fire. News travels fast. It does in a small town, especially when it involves Robert Hargrove. She lowered her voice. You should know. There's talk. Some people are getting tired of how he operates. Talk doesn't help me pay my bank note. Maybe not, but it might help in other ways. Mrs. Chen glanced toward where Caleb sat with Daniel, showing him how to tie a particular knot. That man's good for you. Don't push him away. I'm not. Yes, you are. I can see it. You're scared that needing help makes you weak. It doesn't. It makes you human. Eliza didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. They left shortly after, Daniel riding with Eliza, his arms wrapped tight around her waist. The barn was cold and drafty, but they made it work. Caleb had cleaned out a space and set up bedrolls. It wasn't home, but it was shelter. Daniel curled up between them and fell asleep almost immediately, exhausted by worry. 2 more days, Eliza said quietly. Then the bank moves to foreclose. We'll figure something out. You keep saying that, but I don't see how. Because you're tired. Get some sleep. Things will look different in the morning. But morning came and things looked the same. $70 short, 2 days left, and no clear path forward. They spent the day trying to salvage what they could from the house ruins, mostly metal tools and a few pieces of unburned furniture. It was depressing work. That evening, as they sat around a small fire outside the barn, a rider appeared. For a terrifying moment, Eliza thought it was Hargrove's men coming back. Then she recognized Marshal Hendricks. He dismounted, accepted the coffee Caleb offered, and stood warming his hands by the fire. Heard about the fire, he said. Came to see for myself. Bit late for that, Eliza said. I know, and I'm sorry.
Been dealing with a situation up north? Couldn't get here sooner? He looked at the ruins of the house. Jack Hargrove do this? Yeah, saw him riding away myself. Can you prove it? I saw him. That's not enough? It's enough for me. Might not be enough for a judge, not without corroborating witnesses or physical evidence. He paused. But it's a start. I can bring him in for questioning. And then what? His uncle posts bail and he's back out here finishing the job? Hendricks smiled grimly. Not if I charge him with arson and attempted murder. Those are territorial crimes. He'd be tried in the territorial court, not local. And Robert Hargrove doesn't own those judges. Hope fluttered in Eliza's chest. You'd really do that? Ma'am, I don't like bullies, and I especially don't like rich bullies who think they can burn people out with no consequences. Yeah, I'll do it. He drained his coffee. But I need you to file a formal complaint. Come to my office tomorrow. Make it official. I'll be there. After Hendricks left, Eliza felt something loosen in her chest. It wasn't victory, not yet, but it was the first time in weeks that the law had actually been on her side in a way that mattered. One problem down, Caleb said. One to go. The bank. We'll figure it out. You keep saying that. Because it's true. We've come this far. We don't quit now. That night, lying in the cold barn with Daniel asleep on one side and Caleb on the other, Eliza let herself believe him. Just for a moment, just enough to fall asleep without despair eating her alive. Tomorrow would bring whatever it brought. But tonight, she was still standing, still fighting, still here. Morning came with frost on the ground, the first real bite of winter announcing itself. Eliza woke stiff and cold, her breath misting in the air. Daniel was still asleep, curled up against her side. Caleb was already awake, had the fire going and coffee brewing. Big day, he said, handing her a cup. Yeah. She wrapped her hands around the warmth. You sure you want to come with me to the marshal's office? You don't have to be involved in all this. We've been over this. I'm involved whether you want me to be or not. They left Daniel with Mrs. Chen again, despite his protests. The ride into town felt different this time. Eliza sat straighter in the saddle, felt less like she was running towards something and more like she was walking into it with eyes open. Marshal Hendricks's temporary office was above the mercantile, a cramped space that smelled like old paper and gun oil. He looked up when they entered, gestured to the chairs across from his desk. Mrs. Crow, Mr. Vance, let's get this done proper. He pulled out forms, started taking down Eliza's statement. She told him everything, the ambush at the valley, coming home to find the property destroyed, seeing Jack Hargrove and his men watching her house burn. Hendricks wrote it all down in careful script, occasionally asking questions to clarify details. And you're certain it was Jack Hargrove you saw? Certain. I've known that boy since he was 16. It was him. Good. That's good. Hendricks set down his pen. I'm going to ride out to the Hargrove Ranch this afternoon, bring Jack in for questioning. If he did this, and I believe you that he did, he's going to answer for it. What about his uncle? What about him? Robert Hargrove's the one pulling the strings. Jack just does what he's told. Maybe so. But I can only charge the people I can prove committed crimes. Right now, that's Jack. Hendricks leaned back in his chair. But here's the thing. Once Jack's in custody, facing serious charges, there's a good chance he'll talk. Young men like him, they get scared when they realize they might actually see the inside of a prison. They start looking for ways to lighten their sentence, and the best way to do that is to give up the man who gave the orders. Eliza felt a flicker of hope. You think he'll turn on his uncle? I think it's possible. Can't promise anything, but it's a start. He stood up. Now you folks get on home. Stay out of trouble. Let me do my job. They were halfway back to the ranch when they saw the wagon. Sam Price, driving faster than his old mule usually moved, waving them down. Eliza, thank the stars I found you. What's wrong? Sam pulled up, breathing hard. It's the bank. Mr. Winters sent me to find you. Says you need to come in right away. Something about your loan. Eliza's stomach dropped. The payment's not due until tomorrow. I know, but he says it's urgent. Wouldn't tell me more than that. She exchanged a look with Caleb. This could be bad news. Winters moving up the foreclosure to catch her off guard. Or it could be something else entirely.
Only one way to find out. They rode into town for the second time that day. Eliza's nerves wound tight. The bank was busy, full of people conducting normal business like their worlds weren't falling apart. Winters saw her immediately, ushered her and Caleb into his office with unusual courtesy. "Mrs. Crow, thank you for coming so quickly." "What's this about, Mr. Winters?" He shuffled papers on his desk, looking uncomfortable. "I had a visit this morning from Judge Blackwell, Territorial Circuit Court. He wanted to review your loan file." "Why would a judge care about my loan?" "Because someone filed a complaint alleging that this bank, in cooperation with Robert Hargrove, engaged in fraudulent practices to force you into default. The judge is investigating." Eliza sat down hard. "Who filed the complaint?" "The complaint was anonymous, but it was detailed. Very detailed. Mentioned the early call on your note, the timing of the property damage, Hargrove's known attempts to acquire your land. Judge Blackwell takes these things seriously." "So what does this mean for my loan?" Winters cleared his throat. "It means that until the investigation is complete, I'm extending your payment deadline, 60 days with no additional interest." 60 days. Eliza repeated the words like she didn't quite believe them. "Just like that?" "Just like that." The judge was very clear that any action taken during the investigation period could be seen as evidence of wrongdoing. "I can't foreclose on you without risking the bank's reputation and possibly my job." Relief flooded through her so strong it made her dizzy. 60 days, 2 months to figure things out, to rebuild, to find a way forward. "There's more," Winters continued. "The judge also issued a temporary injunction against Robert Hargrove. He's prohibited from purchasing any property in this county until the investigation concludes. If your ranch does go to auction, which I sincerely hope it doesn't, Hargrove can't bid on it." Caleb spoke up for the first time. "Who filed that complaint, Mr. Winters? You must have some idea. I told you it was anonymous, but between you and me?" He lowered his voice. "Half the ranchers in this county have lost property to Hargrove over the years. Could have been any of them, or all of them together. People get tired of watching bullies win." After they left the bank, Eliza had to sit on a bench outside because her legs wouldn't hold her. Caleb sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. 60 days, she said. "It's a gift. Someone gave us a gift. But who and why? Does it matter? Maybe it was Charlie. Maybe someone else who got pushed out by Hargrove. Maybe it was Sam, for all we know. Point is, we've got time now. Time to rebuild the house, fix the well, get the ranch back to where it can support itself." Eliza looked at him. "You keep saying we. Like this is your fight, too." "It is my fight. Has been for a while now. Caleb, let me say this before I lose my nerve." He turned to face her fully. "When I rode into your yard that first day, I was running from everything. From my past, from pain, from the idea that I could ever have something worth staying for again. And then you gave me work, and you trusted me, and you fought harder than anyone I've ever seen for something you believed in. And somewhere along the way, I stopped running." He took her hand. "I don't want to move on after this is over. I want to stay. Help you rebuild, help raise Daniel, make this ranch into something that lasts. If you'll have me." Eliza's throat was too tight to speak. She'd been alone for so long, carrying everything by herself, that the idea of sharing the weight felt almost dangerous. Like if she let herself lean on someone, they'd disappear and she'd fall. But Caleb hadn't disappeared. He'd stayed through gunfights and fires and destruction. He'd given her his savings, his time, his trust. He'd proven himself 100 times over. "I'm not easy to live with," she said finally. "I'm stubborn, and I don't ask for help, and I've got more baggage than a freight train." "So do I. And Daniel needs to be okay with this. He's got to come first. I wouldn't want it any other way. And I can't promise this'll work. Can't promise the ranch will survive, or that Hargrove won't find some other way to come at us, or that—" Caleb kissed her. It was gentle and brief and tasted like coffee and hope. When he pulled back, he was smiling. "Is that a yes?" he asked. "That's a maybe we'll see." "I'll take it." They rode back to the ranch holding hands, something Eliza hadn't done since Thomas died. It felt strange and right at the same time, like putting on an old coat that fit differently now but still kept you warm. Daniel was waiting when they got back, bouncing with barely contained energy. "What happened? Is it bad?
Are we leaving? Eliza knelt down to his level. No, baby. We're not leaving. We got more time to pay the bank, 60 days.
So we can stay? We can keep the ranch? We can try. Daniel threw his arms around her neck. I knew you wouldn't give up. I told Mrs. Chen you wouldn't. That night they celebrated with a proper meal. Mrs. Chen had sent food back with Daniel, enough for a feast. They ate in the barn by lantern light, the three of them, and for the first time in weeks Eliza felt something like peace. After Daniel fell asleep, she and Caleb sat outside looking at the stars. Where do we start? She asked.
With rebuilding, I mean. The well, probably. Get that producing clean water again. Everything else gets easier. And the house? We've got 60 days in winter coming. I say we shore up the barn, make it livable for the cold months. Come spring, we start on a new house. That's a lot of work. Good thing there's two of us now. She leaned against him, let herself take comfort in his solid presence. Thank you. For staying. For all of this. Thank me when we've actually won. We've already won. We're still here, aren't we? The next few days passed in a blur of hard work. They drained and cleaned the well completely, using lye and elbow grease until the walls were scrubbed raw. Fresh water started seeping back in, slow but steady. They reinforced the barn, patching holes and adding insulation where they could. It wasn't pretty, but it would keep them alive through winter. On the fourth day, Marshal Hendricks rode out to see them. Thought you'd want to know, he said. I arrested Jack Hargrove 2 days ago. He's sitting in the territorial jail right now. Did he talk? Eliza asked. Oh, he talked. Sang like a bird once he realized how much trouble he was in. Hendricks pulled out a folded document. Gave a full confession. Said his Uncle Robert ordered the attacks, promised to pay his legal fees if anything went wrong. Even gave me names of the other men involved. It's enough to bring charges against Robert Hargrove for conspiracy, arson, and attempted murder. Eliza took the document, read through it with shaking hands. There it was in black and white. Everything she'd known but couldn't prove. Jack had laid it all out, signed and witnessed. What happens now? Caleb asked. Now I arrest Robert Hargrove. He'll get a trial in territorial court, probably in the spring. With Jack's testimony and the evidence of the property damage, I'd say the prosecution has a strong case. And if he's convicted, prison, 10 years minimum, maybe more. Hendricks smiled grimly. He won't be pushing anyone else off their land for a long time. After Hendricks left, Eliza sat down on a hay bale and tried to process it all. Hargrove arrested. The investigation into the bank. 60 days to rebuild. It was almost too much good news at once, like the universe was trying to balance out all the bad. You all right? Caleb asked. I don't know. I keep waiting for something else to go wrong. Maybe nothing else will. Maybe we get to just live now without waiting for the next disaster. It was a nice thought. Eliza wasn't sure she believed it yet, but she wanted to. Word spread fast about Hargrove's arrest. Over the next week, people started showing up at the ranch. Some came to gawk, but others came to help. Charlie appeared with lumber and tools. Said he was paying back the help Eliza's father-in-law had given him years ago. Sam brought more supplies, refused payment. Even some of Hargrove's former workers showed up, looking for honest employment now that their boss was in jail. We could use the help, Caleb said. Pay them what we can, promise the rest when the ranch is back on its feet. I don't have money to pay anyone. Then we pay in other ways, food, shelter, a stake in the ranch's future. People around here understand hard times. Most of them will work for the promise of better days ahead. They took on 3 workers, men who'd been pushed out by Hargrove over the years and were eager to help bring him down even in this small way. The work went faster with more hands. The well was fully operational within 2 weeks. The barn became genuinely livable, with separate sleeping areas and a space for Daniel to do his schoolwork. Eliza started planning the new house. It would be smaller than the old one, more practical. But it would be theirs, built with their own hands and the help of people who'd proven themselves friends. Winter came in hard and cold, but they weathered it. The barn held. The well kept producing. They used Eliza's remaining money carefully, stretching every dollar as far as it would go. Caleb took odd jobs in town when he could, bringing in a few extra dollars here and there. It was tight, tighter than comfortable, but they managed. Daniel thrived in ways Eliza hadn't expected. Having Caleb around gave him something he'd been missing since Thomas died, a steady male presence who treated him with respect and taught him skills. Caleb showed him how to work wood, how to handle tools, how to think through problems instead of just reacting to them. The boy soaked it up like water on dry ground. One night in late January, with snow falling outside and the barn warm from the stove, Daniel asked the question Eliza had been expecting. "Is Caleb going to be my new father?" She and Caleb were sitting at the makeshift table they'd built, going over plans for the spring planting. They both looked up. "Would that be all right with you?" Eliza asked carefully. If he was. Daniel thought about it with the seriousness he brought to all important questions. "I already have a father. He's dead, but he's still my father." "That's true. But Caleb's here, and he's teaching me stuff, and he makes you smile more. So maybe he could be like a second father. Is that allowed?" Eliza felt tears prick her eyes. "Yeah, baby, that's allowed." Daniel nodded, satisfied. "Okay then, that's good." Caleb had to clear his throat a few times before he could speak. "I'd be honored to be your second father. You have to promise not to leave, though, like you promised before." "I promise. I'm not going anywhere." "Okay." Daniel went back to his book like it was settled, which maybe it was. That night, after Daniel was asleep, Caleb asked Eliza properly, got down on one knee right there in the barn, held out a simple gold band that had belonged to his mother. "I know this isn't romantic. I know we're living in a barn and barely scraping by, and there's still 1,000 things that could go wrong. But I love you, Eliza Crow. Love your strength and your stubbornness and the way you fight for what's yours. I want to build a life with you, raise Daniel with you, turn this ranch into something we can all be proud of. Will you marry me?" Eliza looked at this man who'd ridden into her yard a stranger and become her partner in every way that mattered, who'd fought beside her and bled beside her and never once suggested she should quit or give up or be anything other than exactly who she was. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I'll marry you." The ring fit perfectly. They married in early spring, a small ceremony in town with Sam as witness and Mrs. Chen crying happy tears. Daniel stood between them, holding both their hands, looking proud and a little embarrassed. Judge Blackwell himself performed the ceremony, having concluded his investigation with findings that resulted in multiple charges against Robert Hargrove and sanctions against the bank. The ranch slowly came back to life. They broke ground on the new house in March, a modest structure that would grow as their fortunes improved. Workers and neighbors pitched in, and by May they had walls and a roof. It wasn't finished inside, but it was shelter that wasn't a barn. The trial started in June. Eliza testified, as did Caleb and several others who'd been victimized by Hargrove over the years. Jack Hargrove's confession was damning, and the physical evidence backed everything up. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours before returning a guilty verdict on all counts. Robert Hargrove was sentenced to 15 years in territorial prison. His ranch was broken up and sold to pay legal fees and restitution to those he'd wronged. Eliza got a settlement of $2,000, not enough to make her rich, but enough to finish the house and buy new cattle and start fresh. The day after the verdict, she and Caleb stood in their new kitchen, barely more than a room with a stove and counter, but theirs, and looked out at the land stretching away in all directions. "We did it," she said. "You did it. I just helped." "We did it," she insisted, "together." He put his arm around her shoulders, pulled her close. "So what now?" "Now we build. Slow and steady, no shortcuts. We buy cattle when we can afford them, plant crops that'll survive, fix things as they break. We teach Daniel how to run this place so when we're old and gray, he can take over." Sounds like a plan. Sounds like a life. Daniel came running from the barn, excited about something he'd found, a nest of baby rabbits in the hay. Eliza watched him talk a mile a minute at Caleb, watched Caleb listen with genuine interest, watched the two of them head back to investigate together. Her family. Not the one she'd started with, but the one she'd built from the ashes of loss and grief and determination. Different from what she'd imagined, but no less real. The land was still hard. The drought hadn't completely broken, and there would be more struggles ahead. But standing there in her new house on her own land with her husband and son, Eliza felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Not the desperate, clawing hope of someone drowning. the steady, quiet hope of someone who'd weathered the storm and found solid ground on the other side. Summer turned to fall, and the fall brought rain. Not enough to end the drought, but enough to green up the grass and fill the creek. They bought 10 head of cattle with part of the settlement money, good stock that would form the foundation of a new herd. Caleb proved to have a gift for breeding, selecting animals that would thrive in the harsh climate. By winter, they had 20 head, and the new house was finished enough to move into completely. They spent their first night in the completed structure gathered around the fireplace, Daniel between them reading aloud from a book while snow fell outside. "This is nice," Daniel said, looking up from his reading. "Having a real house again." "It is," Eliza agreed. "Are we going to be okay now? Like, really okay?" Eliza and Caleb exchanged looks over his head. "Yeah," Caleb said, "we're going to be really okay." And for the first time, Eliza believed it without reservation. They'd fought for this life, bled for it, nearly died for it. They'd earned the right to enjoy it. The next spring, they planted their first full crop, wheat and corn and vegetables. Some of it took, some didn't, but enough grew to feed them through the next winter, with some left to sell. The herd grew to 30 head. They hired back 2 of the workers who'd helped with the house, paid them fair wages from the money the crops brought in. Daniel turned 8, then 9. He grew taller. His voice started to change. He learned to ride and rope and shoot, learned the 100 small skills that would make him a rancher someday. But he also learned to read and write and figure, because Eliza insisted education mattered as much as practical skills. The town's attitude toward her shifted. The woman who'd been judged and whispered about was now someone people respected. She'd stood up to the biggest bully in the territory and won. That meant something out here, where strength and stubbornness were currency. 2 years after the trial, on a warm spring morning, Eliza stood on the porch of her house and watched the sun rise over land that was well and truly hers. The ranch had 50 head of cattle now, good, strong animals that would bring fair prices at market. The fields were planted and showing green, the well-produced clean water. The house stood solid, with additions they'd built as money allowed. Caleb came up behind her, wrapped his arms around her waist. "What are you thinking?" "That we made it. Against all odds, we actually made it. Never doubted it." "Liar, you doubted it plenty." "Maybe a little, but I never doubted you." She leaned back against him, let herself enjoy the moment. In the distance, she could hear Daniel calling to the cattle, his voice carrying clear in the morning air. Her son, growing up strong and confident on land that would be his someday. "You know what the best part is?" she said. "What's that?" "We didn't just survive. We built something better than what we had before. Thomas would have been proud of that." "I think he'd be proud of you regardless." "Maybe. Probably." Thomas had always believed in her, even when she didn't believe in herself. And now she'd proven him right, had taken the worst the world could throw at her, and come out stronger. A rider appeared on the road, heading toward the ranch. Eliza tensed automatically, old instincts hard to shake. But as the rider got closer, she recognized Sam Price. He pulled up in the yard, dismounted. "Morning, Eliza. Caleb." "Sam, what brings you out?" "Got news from town. Thought you'd want to hear it right away." He pulled a newspaper from his saddlebag. "Robert Hargrove died last night. Heart attack, the prison doctor says." Eliza took the paper, read the short article. Robert Hargrove, prominent rancher, dead at 57. The article mentioned his conviction but framed it carefully, like the paper didn't want to speak too ill of the dead. She should have felt something, satisfaction maybe, or relief. But mostly she just felt tired. All that fighting, all that hatred and violence, and in the end time had done what the law couldn't quite finish. "You all right?" Caleb asked. "Yeah, I'm all right." She handed back the paper. "It's over now. Really over." Sam nodded. "Thought you should know. His remaining family is leaving the territory, selling off what's left of the ranch. Figured you might be interested in expanding." Eliza looked out at her land, at what she'd built. "No, we've got enough. Let someone else have a chance." After Sam left, she and Caleb stood together on the porch. Daniel came running up, full of energy and questions about what Sam had wanted. They told him, watched him process the news. "Does this mean the bad men won't come back?" he asked. "Yeah, baby. They're not coming back." "Good." He headed back toward the barn, already moving on to the next thing. Caleb chuckled. He's resilient. Has to be out here. We all do. They went about their day, the rhythm of ranch life pulling them forward. There were cattle to tend and fences to check, and 100 small tasks that made up a life. Eliza threw herself into the work, feeling lighter somehow. Like a weight she'd been carrying had finally been set down. That evening, they gathered for dinner in the kitchen, the three of them around the table Caleb had built. Simple food, but plenty of it. Easy conversation about nothing in particular. Daniel's laugh when Caleb told a bad joke. The warmth of home. After Daniel went to bed, Eliza and Caleb sat on the porch watching the stars come out. The night was clear and cool, perfect. You think we'll ever tell him? Caleb asked. About everything that happened? How close we came to losing it all? Someday, when he's older, want him to understand what it took to build this place. What we built, Caleb corrected. What we built, she agreed. They sat in comfortable silence, hands linked, watching the frontier night unfold around them. Somewhere out there were other ranchers fighting their own battles, other families trying to carve out lives in unforgiving land. Eliza hoped they made it the way she had. Hoped they found the strength to keep going when everything said to quit. The ranch would grow. Daniel would grow. They'd face new challenges because that was the nature of life out here. But they'd face them together, and that made all the difference. Years later, when people asked Eliza about those hard times, she'd tell them the truth, that she'd been scared and desperate and had come within days of losing everything, that she'd been shot and burned out and pushed to the edge of what she could endure. But she'd also tell them about the people who'd helped, Charlie and Sam and Mrs. Chen, Marshall Hendricks doing his job when it mattered, and Caleb, most of all. Caleb, who'd stayed when leaving, would have been easier, who'd fought beside her and believed in her and helped her build something that would last. She'd tell them that the frontier broke some people, but it made others stronger. That hardship could be a teacher if you were willing to learn. That love and stubbornness and sheer determination could overcome almost anything. And she'd tell them that sometimes the best victories weren't the dramatic ones. Sometimes winning just meant waking up in your own home, on your own land with people you loved, ready to face another day. That was enough. That was everything. The Crow Ranch prospered over the years, became known for quality cattle and fair dealing. Daniel grew up and took over when Eliza and Caleb were ready to step back, brought his own wife to the land, and had children of his own. The house was expanded again and again, growing with the family. Eliza lived to see her grandchildren running through the fields she'd fought so hard to keep. She lived to see the ranch become something bigger and better than she'd ever imagined. And when she finally died at 73, surrounded by family in the house she'd built from ash and determination, she died knowing she'd won. Not because she'd beaten Hargrove, though she had. Not because she'd saved the ranch, though she'd done that too. But because she'd proven that a woman alone could stand against the world and come out victorious. Because she'd shown her son and his children that strength came in many forms, and surrender was always a choice. They buried her on a hill overlooking the ranch, next to Caleb, who'd passed 2 years earlier. The headstone was simple. Eliza Crow Vance. She held the line. And she had. Against drought and violence and loss and every force that had tried to break her, she'd held the line. The ranch stood as proof, generations of crows working land that had been bought with blood and tears and unshakable will. The frontier had tried to break her, had thrown everything it had at a widow who dared to stand her ground. The frontier lost.